In the quiet of a deserted news conference room, a solitary reporter named Lamentations sat with a clipboard on his lap, a voice-activated recorder in his vest pocket, and an air of profound sorrow. The chairs were being folded, the bunting taken down, and the other reporters had long since moved on. But Lamentations remained, as if the very act of waiting could somehow summon the absent president back to the podium. He was not just disappointed, he was devastated. The country, he believed, was in shambles, and the president's absence was a symbol of a deeper, more troubling void. Lamentations was a man of deep faith, and an even deeper sense of loss. The Book of Lamentations, an ancient text that he often turned to for solace, spoke to him in a language that was both familiar and haunting. Written in the aftermath of the fall of Jerusalem, it was a collection of 5 elegies that mourned the destruction of the city and the suffering of its people. The author, whom we might call the elegist, did not shy away from the harsh realities of his time. Instead, he confronted them head-on, acknowledging the sins of the nation and the justness of God's wrath, even as he clung to a desperate hope for divine intervention. The elegist's words were a mix of sorrow and self-examination. He did not blame God for the destruction of Jerusalem. Rather, he saw it as a consequence of the nation's apostasy. The Lord had warned them, he insisted, but they had ignored his warnings. The destruction was a fulfillment of divine prophecy, a punishment for their sins. Yet, even in the midst of this devastating loss, the elegist refused to give up hope. He believed that God, in his infinite mercy, would eventually restore what had been lost. Lamentations found a strange comfort in these ancient words. They echoed his own sense of disillusionment and his unyielding faith. The world around him was falling apart, and yet he could not bring himself to abandon the hope that things would one day be made right. He was a man of integrity, refusing to suffer in silence, insisting instead on suffering as a Jew, as a member of a community that had a history of grappling with loss and redemption. But the elegist's message was not just about the past. It was also a commentary on the present. For the readers of Lamentations, the text was a reminder that even after the restoration of Jerusalem, the challenges continued. The city that had been rebuilt was still plagued by subservience, want, and a painful sense of loss. The Lord's silence, which had seemed so profound in the aftermath of the destruction, persisted even in the restored city. The questions that the elegist had posed, why this suffering? What is the meaning of it all? Remained unanswered. In the modern context, Lamentations' steadfast presence in the news conference room was a silent rebuke to the world around him. While others had moved on, he refused to do so. He was a witness to the void left by the absent president, a reminder that the problems of the nation were far from resolved. He was also a symbol of the enduring human quest for meaning and purpose, a quest that often leads us to the same questions that have haunted people for centuries. The Book of Ecclesiastes, another ancient text, offered a different perspective on these questions. The author, known as the preacher or Kohelet, was a man who had seen the world in all its complexity and found it wanting. He was a skeptic, a philosopher who questioned the traditional wisdom of his time. Unlike the elegist, who saw suffering as a divine punishment and a call to repentance, the preacher saw life as inherently meaningless, or hevel in Hebrew, a term often translated as vanity or futility. The preacher's skepticism extended to the idea of divine reward and punishment. He observed that the righteous and the wicked often met the same fate, and that the cycles of life and death were endless and unchanging. He questioned the idea that human actions could influence the divine, and he found little comfort in the traditional promises of a better future. Instead, he advised his readers to enjoy the present moment, to find joy in the simple pleasures of life, because the future was uncertain and the afterlife was a mystery. Yet, despite his skepticism, the preacher was not without a sense of resignation. He acknowledged that God's ways were inscrutable, and that the best one could do was to live in accordance with the wisdom that was available. He advised his readers to fear God and keep his commandments. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13. But he did so with the understanding that the ultimate meaning of life was beyond human comprehension. The contrast between the elegist and the preacher was stark. The elegist saw suffering as a call to repentance and a prelude to divine restoration, while the preacher saw it as a natural part of an unpredictable and often cruel world. The elegist clung to the hope of a better tomorrow, while the preacher found his solace in the here and now. Both, however, shared a deep sense of the human condition, a recognition that life is full of pain and mystery, and that the search for meaning is a lifelong journey. In the end, Lamentations' presence in the news conference room was a poignant reminder of the enduring human struggle to find meaning in a world that often seems indifferent to our hopes and dreams. He was a man who refused to accept the status quo, who insisted on the importance of the president's words and actions, and who clung to the hope that the nation could be restored. His unwavering faith, even in the face of loss and silence, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. But as the room grew darker and the last of the chairs were folded away, Lamentations finally stood, his clipboard in hand. He had waited as long as he could, but even he knew that some questions would remain unanswered. Some voids would remain unfilled. He stepped out into the night, his thoughts as weighty as the silence that had surrounded him, and walked away, a lone figure in a world that was still searching for meaning. In the end, the search continues.